He's gonna have to fight! Bang! Pressure's coming! Dumped! Hogtied! When you've given everything, what will the record books say about you, Matthew?
Welcome back for Season 2, Episode 38 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Last week, we pushed out our episode a day earlier to line up with Thanksgiving, and we gave you predictions on all the NFL Thanksgiving games. The Lions were the one pick that I missed on, dropping a one-touchdown game to the Packers with an insane catch at the end on a 4th and 3 from Dontavian Wicks, while the Cowboys and Bengals pulled off some fun upsets of the Chiefs and Ravens. Then we pondered a couple of fresh faces hired as MLB managers in the first month or so of the offseason, and we wrapped up with a final recap of the USA Powerlifting Michigan State Championships. Good news for all of you is I don't have any more powerlifting meets on my schedule for the rest of the year to compete in or announce. Bad news is what the schedule might look like for next year if all of the stars align. And this week, let's crack it open with another Fantasy Football Friday, folks, because here comes the playoffs. We're heading into Week 14. In many leagues, that is the final week of the regular season in fantasy. In one league, I've already locked up a playoff spot, and in the other, there's about a 75% chance of it happening, which is great. So it is time for the big ones. The things you must do if you've made the playoffs, no matter how you got there. There are things you can do, formulas you can follow year after year to give yourself the best possible chance of taking home a championship, and they show in the results. I'm not going to reiterate anything from our most recent Fantasy Football Friday. I'm going to try and make this stuff all new. The tip I'll start with today. Number one, and I really do think it's maybe the most important for a few reasons, is to roster multiple quarterbacks. There are a ton of factors that matter more at the end of the season than in the beginning, and here are a few that you might want to consider. The weather is a big one. Quarterbacks in very cold weather, outdoor environments, especially lots of wind or precipitation, they have to have their expectations turned down a little bit as pure throwers of the football. The ball gets a little bit harder, receivers' hands are colder, and then yardage is going to be affected too by play calling. This can work in favor of some athletic quarterbacks, believe it or not. Think Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts, guys that are normally asked to carry the ball on design runs, and they play in cold weather in their home games. Guys who are accustomed to it are likely going to do more of that, especially around the goal line, and improve their rushing output. Matchups are also even more important down the stretch. No matter if I have the best quarterback in the world, which for my money, recently has been Matt Stafford, I would not be willing to play him against the Texans defense, for example, the number one unit in the league by fewest yards and points. And lastly, higher workload leads to more injuries, all things equal. That's actually something that does put me off a little bit from Matt Stafford for the fantasy playoffs, although he's been awesome this year. The number of passing attempts on the year, the number of times guys have taken hits or sacks, number of rushing attempts where they don't get down, think Jaden Daniels and how he got hurt, those all have the potential to predict incidents of injury, and a quarterback injury could lose you a championship all on its own. To this point, there are going to be viable options on waivers right now in your leagues. Whether it's C.J. Stroud, Jacoby Brissett with the Cardinals, man, he's been great filling in for Kyler, Sam Darnold, or somebody else of that kind of ilk. You might even be able to pick up Kyler himself if he ever gets activated off of IR. The Cardinals head coach Jonathan Gannon just announced that it won't be during Week 14, but if it's next week in the playoffs, there's a chance he comes back right into the lineup, and then he's going to be well rested, have nothing to lose. And on that same note, Jaden Daniels is kind of exactly the same way. Although trade deadlines have passed and anybody who might have had Daniels definitely should have kept them on their team in their IR slot, he should be able to give a little boost to Washington skill players even over Marcus Mariota. And even though I know it got him injured in the first place, I would like to see him make some plays with his legs. I think there's a good chance of that. My number 2 playoff tip today is one that I borrowed pretty much verbatim from a list made by one of my favorite ESPN fantasy experts, Matt Bowen. I'm going to link his article for you in the description. He does a great job, and I've personally taken some of his tips before with good results. This tip is to hold anyone that's injured or plays in one of the later slot games in your flex spot. You've certainly figured out the typical role of the flex spot by now if you've played through your first full season at least to this point, but this is a little bit higher level use of it. If you have a player that's been questionable all week and they've been missing practices especially, the flex spot is the best place for them to hang out, as opposed to one of your running back or receiver or even tight end spots. The more time you have to set your lineup and make sure that you never have any inactive players, the better. Hence why this works both for injuries and for just guys playing in those late slots. It also allows you to use a player at any position you choose. Again, you can put a running back, a receiver, or even a tight end in that flex, and then if they're ruled out or they're going to go all the way down to a game time decision, you can fill the spot with any player of those positions. Tip number 3 for the day is the most nerdy of all. And I wish I didn't have to delve to this kind of depth and get quite so nitty-gritty to win, but I really do think it can help. The last thing to look for when you need a great game out of a certain receiver is to know the individual receiver-DB matchup. This can look like a few things. The number one thing that makes you downgrade a player is a shadow matchup, in which a defense's number one corner will nearly always travel with the offense's number one receiver no matter where they line up, where they go in motion or shift, and it'll tend to see a higher incidence of man coverage. This predictably produces more floor performances. That is, the scores that are right towards the bottom end of what you would expect for that receiver. A non-shadow matchup is far better from an offensive fantasy perspective. That means the top cover guy will align either entirely on one side of the field or move around based just on the distribution of receiving threats around the field. This also might mean more zone coverage, which is promising in PPR formats. Examples of a brutal shadow matchup that I saw listed in another list of fantasy tips a few weeks ago, the Jaguars' Brian Thomas Jr. And don't get me wrong, he hasn't been an impact receiver this year, like at all, as last week when I checked, he was tied for 47th in PPR points per game after a top 5 finish last year. But his week 16 and 17 matchups, where he's likely going to be shadowed and all of these fantasy managers are fighting tooth and nail, read like this. Patrick Surtain II, Broncos, reigning Defensive Player of the Year, and Sauce Gardner with the Colts, 2-time All-Pro and one of the best there is in press man coverage. Those are 2 of the weeks when you would want Thomas to break out and finally have a big game, but the odds of that are next to 0 with these matchups. It's pretty easy to just Google, will X defender shadow Y receiver, and then get a pretty good quick answer from the 1,000,001 different fantasy sites run by people who have lots more time and knowledge than I do. Start thinking about those individual corner and receiver matchups, and I hope that informs a crucial start-sit decision for you at some point in your playoff run. That's all for Fantasy Football Friday for this week. Next up is one of the more shocking team and franchise icon divorces of recent memory in the NBA. I say recent memory. The biggest one that jumps out to probably all of us is the Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis trade last year and why Dallas would ever get rid of a 26-year-old superstar. At least they got a great player in return, because what the Clippers did on Wednesday gets them nothing and probably is going to cost them. They cut Chris Paul, the 12-time All-Star, the 11-time All-NBA selection, the Clipper for 6 stellar years right in the middle of his career, and the man who is second all-time in assists. These are all the same person, mind you, Christopher Emmanuel Paul. That doesn't sound right on so many levels, that he is going to be released from a place he had called home for quite a while on the morning of a game day while the Clips were in Atlanta to play the Hawks. Now, in fairness, it's not as if there were no signs here. Chris Paul was coming off the bench for the 16 games he played this year. It was only the second time in his career he had consistently done that. Last year with the Spurs, he played and started in all 82 games, which was insanely impressive, and of course a historical outlier. He's the only player ever to play in all of those 82 games in year 20 or later, so one would obviously expect regression. His minutes were cut in half from last year. Now, different team, different season, but it's still telling that LA only wanted him playing 14 minutes a game. Then, as usual, the lack of consistent playing time hurt his performance, and he was on pace for career lows in everything. Among the other tidbits to come out of this story is the rift between him and Clippers head coach Tyronn Lue. There's multiple reports out there saying the two weren't talking, and that's not how coach-player relationships work. All of the team's official statements say that there's no scapegoating going on here. I'm going to try to find a link to someone that posted his Instagram story, but it just said, "Just found out I'm being sent home," with a peace sign emoji. You know, it's nice and to the point. Chris is a famously tough competitor, as you have to be when you're maybe 6', 175, and you're playing a lot of guys that are bigger, faster, and half your age. But it seems like that was likely taken the wrong way at practice, and there was a sentiment that he was kind of the old head out there barking to himself. You know, I love retirement tour stories when they're good, when they have the good ending. If it's one of those players you've grown up your whole life watching, and you see people giving them awesome gifts, and traveling from all around the country or the world to see their last game at that specific locale, those are real special. Miguel Cabrera had a bunch of magical moments during his. David Ortiz arguably probably should have won MVP during his. And I know we're jumping sports, but stay with me. Kobe scored 60 points in the last game of his retirement tour, last game of his career, and he was 3 years younger then than CP3 is now. Michael Jordan didn't really want a retirement tour, but he got one. This was the starkest, most exact opposite of that. And this is not to say that highly unproductive players who strain relationships on their team should get a roster spot just because of their name and legacy. The worst thing that could have happened to the man formerly known as CP3 was the Clippers getting off to a 5-16 start before the game in Atlanta, and that's what happened. When you're losing and you're looking for a scapegoat, it's always easy to find one. Now, beyond still owing him some money, one final awkward wrinkle is that he is ineligible to be traded until December 15th. There are a few options for LA to manage this situation. There's a contract buyout, there's releasing him to waivers, or just have him sit tight until that trade window opens up. He was making sort of a pittance for an NBA player at $3.6 million for this year. This is another one of those issues where my best course of action on it is to just say that I have no idea what happened or what will happen with him in reality, but I will be following along with all the news stories on it. The ball knowledge requirement being what it is here, I will stay in my lane, but the separation between Chris Paul and the Clippers is a shocker. The final big hit for today, no pun intended, is the upcoming MLB Winter Meetings and a couple of quick predictions. I am awfully jealous that all these teams are heading to Orlando next week, as I'm sure it's going to be beautiful as ever, and the Midwest keeps getting rocked with the snow. The winter meetings mark 3 of the most important days of free agency, trades, and industry discussions of the entire league season. Just over a month after everyone has watched the confetti fall on the World Series champion Dodgers and felt that postseason depression hit. The number one name on the market, as it were, is back-to-back AL Cy Young winner Tarik Skubal, and of course that's the subject of prediction number 1. I do not think he walks away with a new contract from the Tigers or any other team, but I do think that he's going to leave a deal of $400 million or more on the table. It still seems doubtful that the Tigers are going to offer him the most total money of any team or the longest contract. He is not a free agent until the winter of next year. Remember that. If anybody wanted to trade for him and let him play out the 1 year on his current contract, they could, but they would pay dearly for that, especially if he repeats any of his kind of performance from, again, the 2 back-to-back Cy Young years. If you don't count Shohei Ohtani, then Zach Wheeler of the Phillies has the highest average annual value in his contract at $42 million per year among starting pitchers. It really feels like Skubal is going to command well over $50 million a year, and there are just not many teams that can commit like that. The potential trade packages thrown around are going to be fun. You could kind of take somebody's entire minor league organization, and then it would still sort of make sense because it's Tarik Skubal, and if you get that Cy Young level production, then there's certainly an argument to be made. But I think Skubal will walk away from all of it and return to Detroit for at least next year. Now, Skubal looks like a future Hall of Famer, but you know who is an absolute lock? Cardinals third baseman Nolan Arenado. 10 Gold Gloves, 8 All-Star appearances, that'll do it for you. He's going to play in 2026 at 35 years old. That's not a prediction, that's a fact, and he's been on short lists of trade candidates for a while as the aging curve comes for him. He has 2 years and $42 million remaining on an 8-year, $260 million contract, and he and the team are mutually ready to move on. If the Cardinals are willing to eat some of that remaining salary, finding a suitor becomes easier, as always. I'm going to close my eyes, throw my magic dart, and I'm going to say that Nolan Arenado goes to the Diamondbacks. It's a market and a league forces thing, but there's also room for him on that roster. Eugenio Suarez was their everyday third baseman. He left Arizona for Seattle at the trade deadline this year in the middle of a season where he hit 49 home runs. But as usual, Suarez played very poor defense, and he did not run well, and then the Diamondbacks struggled at third base to produce. Unfortunately, Arenado is not so productive at the plate now either. His power numbers are in the toilet from his prime. He has 7 career seasons with at least 30 home runs, but he only hit 12 last year, so there's a good chance that he provides more value with his glove than his bat at this point of his career. Other reasons why I like this. Arizona's lineup already has enough studs. They had 3 different position players get MVP votes. Geraldo Perdomo finished 4th, Corbin Carroll finished 7th, and Ketel Marte finished 22nd. I think this is one of the best landing spots in the league for a guy that really doesn't want to be there in St. Louis anymore, and he'll get one of the richer contracts that we've seen for a player 35 or older because of his career accolades. And lastly, I think that the catching and relief pitching markets are going to explode at the winter meetings and beyond this year. Cal Raleigh really made the world believe a catcher could win MVP for much of the year. Some still think he deserved it over Aaron Judge, and he set so many different franchise and league catcher records. My favorite being the 60 home runs that topped the old catcher record by 12. Relief pitching was already trending this way, getting more expensive, due to the way bullpens are managed and specialized, the incidence of arm injuries to starters, and 100 other little evolutions to the game. Cal Raleigh is making $105 million over 6 years. Could you imagine if he were getting an extension this offseason instead of having signed in March? I can't even speculate what that number could have been. He could have had one of the great pay bumps in a contract season of all time. And relievers have recently gone over that $20 million a year threshold. That was the Mets' Edwin Diaz in 2022 to break that. And I think that might be pushed to $25 million per year before these meetings are over. We just ask so much of relievers nowadays that I think they're gonna need to be paid. And there you have it, my quick predictions on the MLB Winter Meetings. Quick hodgepodging at the end. I did see that LeBron's double-digit point scoring streak ended at 1,297 games on Thursday night. And yes, I put that beyond even Joe DiMaggio and the 56-game hitting streak as the most unbreakable streak in the history of sports. It's also no surprise as LeBron's in year 23 and his minutes are down a little bit, and we know he was dealing with the sciatica that delayed his season debut. I'm also generally aware that Lane Kiffin was hired away from Ole Miss by LSU, and everybody's up in arms about the state of college football. They're furious over him leaving a 6th-ranked team that's gonna play in the playoff. I am finally getting a bit more time to watch college football as all of my fall sports are well and truly done, and it's definitely a great time to get into it. And finally, one more personal update too. This coming week is the last class of my life, ideally anyway. I'm finishing my capstone for my master's on Wednesday, 12/10/25. Saying the date out loud, it just gives me chills. I will have more time to devote to like everything else I want to do in life, and I will have a very expensive piece of paper with my name on it pretty soon. Before next episode, in fact. I might share some links to some of my final deliverables because there's some really cool sports media things that I'm creating or gonna create that I hope can be great resources for people like me. Things that I wish I would have had when I was just starting. That's enough. Thanks for coming back week after week. Or if you're relatively new here, we're always happy to have you. Either way, check out all my socials, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, @TheVoiceOfTanner, X, just Voice of Tanner, YouTube, the whole thing spelled out with spaces. Catch you next week. This has been Season 2, Episode 38 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
He's gonna have to fight! Bang! Pressure's coming! Dumped! Hogtied! When you've given everything, what will the record books say about you, man?